As usual for WCPP over the past few years, all of our plans went out the window as the end of July 2018 approached, thanks to raging wildfires all over the North Boreal forests. When the planning finally settled, we decided to do our very first fly-in canoe trip, leaving from Red Lake on Monday, July 30th and flying over smoldering forests below before landing in Adventure Lake with our gear and once again setting off into the wilds of north-central Ontario. The next 5 days would be spent paddling from Adventure Lake through Haven, Wrist, Mexican Hat, Glen, Optic, Telescope, and finally to Oni Lake. From there, we organized a shuttle pickup on the Suffolk Lake Road from a local outfitter. I was planning to head back into the bush for my first solo canoe trip after the others were picked up. Monday came early as we started this long 6-hour drive from my parents' house in Carmen, Manitoba at 0400 in order to make our scheduled flight out of Red Lake at around 1300 hours. When we finally arrived and started sorting gear on the dock in Red Lake, we realized that we'd booked 2 flights for the 4 of us, choosing the cheaper option of a beaver over an otter. The beaver can only carry 1 canoe at a time. This wouldn't have been an issue except one of the 2 beavers available was down for maintenance, meaning we had to fly out one group of 2 at a time, doubling the amount of time the shuttle would take. Oh well. This is the North, and things are done a little more last minute and casual here compared to the stodgy formalities and stiff contracts back in my familiar concrete jungle. I don't love flying in general due to an incident on my very first flight many years ago as a teenager. The combination of a small plane, inexperienced pilot, and strong thunderstorms resulted in a mayday situation. Thanks to this, small planes make me nervous. Small bush planes cause even more anxiety. You can imagine my nerves as the tiny beaver was loaded up and we started taxiing on the lake for takeoff. I love how casual bush plane flights are. The pilot wore shorts and a t-shirt, the windows were cranked wide open, and there was a wrench free hanging right by my head. You get the feeling that you're jumping in a well-used taxi on one of these trips, which is exactly what you're doing. A water taxi that flies and has your canoe strapped to its side. The engine on a beaver is so loud you require ear covers while flying or you'll go deaf. As we took off over Red Lake, I realized how bumpy our ride was going to be, and it made me question, and not for the first time, my sanity when planning this trip. It was very cool to fly over familiar lakes such as Douglas, Hatchet, Embryo, Hanson, Restoule, and Haven that I've paddled through many times over the years. We could see many spot fires burning in the park as we flew over it. The Domain Lake fire was putting a pretty good sized plume of smoke into the shimmering hot summer air to our north. After only 45 minutes, the pilot began a very steep and fast descent to Adventure Lake. Survived it. Vern was once again questioning his own sanity for a few minutes there. We watched as he took off to pick up Harold and Henty before heading to shore for a coffee while we waited. At this point, you might be wondering why we chose to fly into Adventure Lake at all, only to pretty much immediately start portaging towards Haven. Why not either fly further, like Bulging Lake, or just directly into Haven? It's a good question and one that I believe we didn't take long enough to consider on hindsight. Because the afternoon slowly ticked past as we continued to sit on the docks in Red Lake, and mostly due to the double flight issue, we ended up losing 2 to 3 hours of our day compared with our original plans. Not a lot, but it made a difference. And don't forget, our original plan was to fly into Royd or Gammon Lakes and paddle down the Gammon River into Hammerhead or Restoule on Monday. We were hoping up until the last minute that this route would reopen for us, but it remained closed due to a small fire near Hammerhead that we saw from our flight. What we should have done on hindsight was land in Bulging Lake and paddle our way to Adventure or even Haven on Monday. I wanted to camp in Haven due to the excellent walleye fishing there, which limited some of our options. All good. Either way, it was very enjoyable in the end.
No fish rod, but one home.
As we paddled towards the first portage towards Haven Lake, the plane with Harold and Henty flew overhead, circled, and landed. After all the messing around with the flights, we were left with a pretty short travel day on Monday, navigating easily from Adventure to Haven Lake via 2 reasonable portages that local outfitters recently maintained.
This sucker is...
Help me mentally prepare.
75.
Oh!
375?
275.
Okay, phew.
Well, it was a short visit at Adventure Lake, but it was nice.
The first thing we noticed on the first portage was how easy it was to navigate, thanks to all the clearing work that has been done in the area. We enjoyed the portages to Haven for another reason, too. Blueberries. I've honestly never seen so many before.
I just ate more fruit than I usually do in a month.
I'm on vacation.
From the camp jerk, apparently.
The guy with the shittiest chair.
Yeah. We're having fish and Rod is having wieners. Man.
Haven Lake was gray and moody, but gorgeous. We made our way to the great island campsite that Nico and I had used back in 2016, and it was as good as I remembered. It's strange coming back to familiar sights in the middle of nowhere. Life moves by at such a furious pace in between these visits. It makes me thankful for the few times I managed to enjoy such remote and beautiful spots.
See, that's the site up there, Rod, right to our left.
Oh, yeah.
So that probably is the opening. Nice size pike.
Our first day was a long one. So strange to wake up in my parents' house in the morning, 500 kilometers away, and then lay my head down at midnight on a lake in the middle of nowhere, with loons calling back and forth and the sounds of night washing over our little camp.
A little bit grayer this morning. Right, Harold? Sunny, clear skies, no wind. Perfect sort of day.
Our second day and first morning in WCPP wasn't a very long one. We only had to go to Jigsaw Lake, so the fact that the forecast wasn't great and we woke up to a pretty wet camp didn't bother us as much as it might normally have. The portages were as good as I remembered, cleared through short regrowth forest and cairned over the barren, burned-out landscapes in Canadian Shield. We had to be careful not to slip on the slick, wet rock thanks to the rain, but everyone got through unscathed.
What do you figure?
I think we're good.
Hoi! Gilbert! Scheiße. I mean, there are even little 2 lakes in between. We closed out our first full day in the park by catching and frying up some more delicious walleye before turning in early, hoping for a better weather the next day. The weather certainly didn't start great the next day. It was only 8 degrees when we woke up. What is that about on August 1st?
We're roughing it. Kind of are today.
Our route for today would take us on a long portage to Wrist Lake before continuing through Streak, Amber, and Nutria into Mexican Hat. From here, we would portage and paddle north to a nice peninsula camp in Glen Lake. The 800-meter portage from Jigsaw to Wrist Lake was cold and wet, but relatively easy, just as I remembered from 2016. Rod managed to catch 2 lake trout while trolling across and out of Wrist Lake, but the rest of us were skunked.
Yep. Which one is this? Streak or Amber? We are on Amber. Amber on the map, Amber en route. Little burnt.
He's got his camera out, don't worry.
There were warnings on the internet forums regarding the suck in between Nutria Lake and Mexican Hat Lake, where the beavers tend to either flood the entire area, making travel easy, or they build more than one dam and really muck things up, literally. Alas, we got the latter.
This is definitely the worst I've seen it. Would you go with my pack in there?
We had a very pleasant lunch on a pristine sandy beach on the western end of Mexican Hat Lake, just as the clouds finally dissipated and blue sky started showing through warm sunshine to back it all up. We took our time on the small sandbar, making coffee, soup, and drying out our gear on the nearby bushes. It was here that I also photographed some cedar waxwings. After a lengthy break, we were in much better spirits and ready for the paddle to Glen Lake for the night. Well, even with Nico, this was giving her. Did you catch any more walleye?
Yeah, we got 2 on the stringer.
Nice. Very nice.
Both here? One here. One there.
Beautiful night on Glen. Back to the campsites. Started out today with a low drizzle, cloud, generally pretty crappy. Ending it just about as opposite as you can be.
As we sat around a cheery, warm fire on a beautifully still night, I noticed that Mars was showing up very clearly in the southern skies and reflecting in the calm lake below. The next hour or two were spent stargazing and looking up at the clearest night sky of the year. Just before going to bed, the amazing experience was capped with a display to the north. The northern lights decided to show up. Our fourth day in the park dawned a beauty. After leisurely packing up camp to the sound of loons, we paddled across the top of Glen Lake before following the Restoule River up 2 well-maintained portages into Optic Lake. We set up a beautiful camp there, the only time I would camp in this lake before it burned up in 2021.
Glen Lake, noon on Thursday.
That's with the wind.
Yeah.
Optic Lake. The experts at work. Ground cloth last.
Yes.
I think we'll have to speed this video up 20 times.
Just to make it look like it's regular speed.
Campsite on Optic. It's a beaut. The lake and the campsite are both beauts. This is the lower half of the lake. Yeah. As the heat and humidity ramped up, the Domain Lake wildfire became a plume of white smoke on the horizon, easily visible from camp. It's got to be the Domain Lake fire, eh? It's the only one we can really see. After our first non-walleye supper of the trip, we headed out to catch a bunch and predictably ended up eating a second supper as the sun slowly sank over the boreal.
Supper nighttime walleye fry on Optic. Courtesy of Harold, our cook for the night. Oh yes, freshly caught, freshly filleted.
We started our fifth day with a relaxing breakfast on Optic Lake before setting out for the two portages towards Telescope. After paddling across the huge lake, we enjoyed the smaller Hjalmar lakes with their easy portages and pictographs before setting up camp on a familiar island site in Onnie for the last night of the group trip.
Little portage in the Restool River out of Optic Lake. Just a 70 pacer. Easy peasy.
Coming. Winter's coming, yeah. Back to plugging in vehicles and stuff like that? Mm-hmm.
The wind picked up throughout the day, but we managed the long paddle across Telescope Lake before it really got strong. Thank goodness. It was also very hot and humid.
Portage into Telescope. 200 meters. Very nice. Bye-bye, Woodland Caribou.
As we sat around the fire late on Friday night in Oni Lake, we noticed the northern sky was starting to light up every few seconds from lightning strikes. The lightning was near constant and it started picking up the pace around midnight. The storms were close enough at that point that we decided to head into the tents. There must have been a wall cloud at the front of the storm and it slammed into our little corner of nowhere with some pretty scary strength. There was nothing to do but hold on and hope for the best. I fell asleep to the sound of driving rain and wind. Our sixth day in the park was the last day of the group trip and the first day of my solo effort. It was a day full of mixed emotions and excitement, most of it good and some of it a bit different than I first expected. After a night of wicked thunderstorms, we paddled and portaged a short way to the Suffle Lake Road, where the rest of the group would meet the outfitter while I would head back into the bush for my first solo canoe trip. As the group trip slowly wound down on a hot, humid day with more intense storms building overhead, I felt a nervous energy building for my looming solo venture. I wish I could say that it was no big deal and everything was in hand, but that would be a lie. I was very close to jumping in my truck and following the outfitter van down the road as I watched him disappear into the shimmering summer air in a cloud of dust. My next 5 days will be spent learning a lot about myself and about the myths and realities of solo canoe adventuring in the wilds of Woodland Caribou, but that's for another video.